What if The Boys had its own video game? The Boys is one of the biggest TV shows on the planet, and somehow nobody has made a proper AAA game based on it yet. And honestly, that's kinda weird. Because when you think about it, this world already has everything a great game needs. Corrupt superheroes, stealth, action, boss fights, moral choices, and a psychopath who can laser your head off before you even realize he's in the room. So today, I'm not just gonna say, The Boys should get a game. We are actually gonna figure out what that game would look like. The story, the gameplay, the mechanics, the engine, the studio, and most importantly, how to make it feel like The Boys instead of just another superhero game. Because if we're gonna do this, we are doing it properly. So let's get into it. Before we talk about gameplay or characters, we need to talk about the biggest problem with making this game: Homelander. Think about it. If I can beat Homelander 3 hours into the game, then congrats, you've somehow turned Homelander into a random Ubisoft outpost captain. But if I can never fight him at all, then what's the point? So instead of treating him like a traditional final boss, I'd make him a gameplay system. Something similar to Mr. X from Resident Evil or the Xenomorph from Alien Isolation. You can't kill him until the very end of the game. He's constantly haunting you. The more information you uncover about Vought, the more soups you recruit, the closer you get to discovering how to kill him, the more aggressive he becomes. And honestly, I think that's the key to making this whole thing work. Now, let's talk about the world itself. At first, I thought this should be fully open world, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that creates a problem. If Homelander can appear literally anywhere at any time, balancing the game becomes a nightmare. So I'd go with a semi-open world structure. You get large areas to explore, side missions to do, secrets to find, but the city opens up chapter by chapter as the story progresses. By the end of the game, most of the city is available, but the developers still have enough control to keep the pacing tight. Obviously, Vought Tower needs to be a major location. Honestly, it should almost feel like its own character. The city itself should be dark, corrupt, and uncomfortable. Corporate districts covered in Vought propaganda, rundown neighborhoods, safe houses, secret facilities, places where you can actually feel the influence these soups have over the world. I mean, Vought should have so much impact on the world and the city that if you rescue civilians or do any good in the game, they would just turn around the story and tell people that you're a terrorist or you're killing people and making you look bad. So it gets closer and closer to the show as we go on. That's how much impact I need Vought to have in this game. And because the story runs parallel to the show instead of directly adapting it, we can recreate some iconic moments without just retelling the entire series. Imagine the stadium scene. Instead of watching Homelander and Butcher stare at each other in a cutscene, you're actually playing through that moment, trying to move through the crowd without drawing Homelander's attention, knowing full well that if he spots you, you're probably screwed. For the playable characters, I'd go with 3: Butcher, Huey, and Starlight. And honestly, I think they're perfect for this kind of game, because they all represent completely different perspectives. Starlight still believes there are good soups, Butcher would happily delete all of them if given the chance, and Huey sits right in the middle, trying to stop both sides from going too far. Now obviously, they shouldn't all play the same, that would be boring as hell. Let's start with Huey. Huey would be focused on stealth, gathering information, hacking systems, going undercover, sneaking into places he's definitely not supposed to be. He wouldn't get into many direct fights because, let's be honest, if Huey starts throwing hands with a soup, he's probably about to become a red stain on the floor. His skill tree would focus on things like stealth, hacking, information gathering, and social manipulation. The more you upgrade him, the better he becomes at gathering information without needing to start a fight. Then we have Starlight. She would be the balanced character, part stealth, part combat, part infiltration. A lot of her missions would take place inside Vought, where she's acting as your inside source. Her skill tree would improve her powers, infiltration abilities, and leadership skills. The goal is to make her the character that can adapt to almost any situation. And finally, we have Butcher, the violent option. Heavy weapons, aggressive combat, intimidation, and eventually Temp V powers. His skill tree would focus on weapons, brutality, and Temp V enhancements. Unlike Huey and Starlight, Butcher's upgrades are all about becoming more dangerous. By the end of the game, he should feel completely different from the version you started with. More powerful, more unstable, and honestly, a little terrifying. Now, instead of a normal good and evil system, I would use something a little different. A trust system. Every major choice affects how much your team trusts you. Do you kill innocent soups just to be safe? Do you use Temp V even though everyone tells you not to? Do you prioritize results over people? The more brutal your decisions become, the more trust you lose. And this shouldn't just affect the ending, it should affect gameplay too. Certain characters stop helping you, some side missions disappear, relationships get worse, maybe some allies even leave entirely. So every decision actually matters. Now, obviously, you can't make a The Boys game without the 7. And no, I'm not just talking about Homelander, he can go fuck himself. If he hasn't hurt me. Of course, if he has, I am sorry. Characters like A-Train, Black Noir, Translucent, and of course, the Peak himself would all play major roles throughout the story, but I don't think every encounter should be a boss fight. Some characters can be recruited, some can be manipulated, some can be convinced to stay neutral, and every single time you gain support from another soup, Homelander becomes more suspicious, which means more patrols, more investigations, and more chances of him showing up at the worst possible moment. So if you're wondering where are Kimiko, and Frenchie, well, they're not playable characters because having a roster of characters that big would make this game look more like Marvel's Avengers, and we all know how much love that game got. So they're not playable, they will have their impact in the cutscenes and on the trust system of the game, but you cannot play as them. But Frenchie is going to be your upgrade bench. He's gonna give you the gadgets, the cool shit. You will have him, investigating things that you find from your missions and your side missions. And we could even have a DLC made for them that focuses on the relationship between Frenchie and Kimiko. So they're not gonna be just pushed aside. They're actually going to have their impact, but they're not playable. So, yeah. Now let's talk about what I think could be one of the coolest mechanics in the game, Temp V. Imagine you're on a mission, gathering information, everything's going fine, then suddenly a powerful soup catches you. You can't run, you can't fight, you're completely out of options. So in a moment of pure desperation, you inject yourself with this experimental serum you just found. And surprise! It's Temp V. Now, if you've watched the show, you know exactly why that's both awesome and a terrible idea. And if you haven't watched the show, what the fuck are you doing here, dude? You just spoiled yourself. Are you happy now? Huh? Temp V gives you temporary powers that can completely change a fight, but every time you use it, there is a cost. Blurred vision, audio distortion, permanent injuries, shrinking health bars, and lower trust from your teammates. The game should constantly tempt you to use it, because that's exactly what Temp V does in the show. It solves your problem today while creating even bigger problems tomorrow. Combat should be brutal. Not superhero movie brutal, The Boys brutal. Something between the newer God of War games and what we've seen from Insomniac's Wolverine. Every fight should feel messy, violent, and dangerous. Now, Butcher also gets a rage meter, and instead of just making him stronger, the mechanic evolves throughout the game. At first, it's actually simple. More damage, a few powerful attacks, maybe a guaranteed one-shot bullet. But as the story progresses and Temp V becomes more involved, that rage meter changes, eventually unlocking the terrifying powers we see later in the show. So at first, normal human stuff, but when you're on Temp V, it gives you god level powers and a longer lasting Temp V effect, and by the end, it will be those tentacle thingies he had in the show. Now let's go back to Homelander, because this is where everything comes together. The game would have a dynamic threat system. The more progress you make, the higher Homelander's threat level becomes. At low threat levels, he barely appears. At medium threat levels, Vought starts increasing surveillance. At high threat levels, Homelander actively starts hunting you. Random encounters become more common, missions become riskier, and by the end of the game, nowhere feels completely safe anymore. The player should constantly feel like they're being watched, not because the game tells them, because the world itself changes around them. Now, for the technical side of things, for all my fellow nerds, when it comes to the engine, I actually considered a few options. The first obvious choice would be Unreal Engine 5, and honestly, the more I thought about it, the more it felt like the right answer. The game relies heavily on atmosphere, the dark lighting inside Vought Tower, massive crowds during public events, detailed facial animations for all those tense conversations where you're trying not to piss off a literal god. And of course, Homelander himself, because the biggest technical challenge of this game isn't the graphics, it's the AI. Homelander can't just be a scripted enemy that shows up every few missions. He needs to feel unpredictable. The player should never be completely sure whether they're safe or not. And I think Unreal Engine 5 gives developers the best toolkit for building a system like that. Now, there are other options. Rockstar's Rage Engine is incredible when it comes to creating believable worlds and realistic NPC behavior. But the problem is that the engine is basically locked to Rockstar. You're not getting access to it unless you're Rockstar. Another option could be something like Unity, but for a large cinematic AAA game with multiple playable characters, advanced AI systems, huge environments, and high-end visuals, I think Unreal is just the safer choice. So for me, Unreal Engine 5 wins pretty comfortably. Now for the studio, my first choice is Insomniac, but there's actually a problem with that pick. Most Insomniac games are power fantasies. Spider-Man makes you feel unstoppable. Ratchet & Clank makes you feel unstoppable. The Boys should not make you feel unstoppable. Half the game should be spent terrified that Homelander might show up. So while I trust Insomniac with the combat, I would be curious whether they could handle that slower, horror-inspired side of the experience. Rockstar is another strong option. They've already proven they can build incredibly detailed worlds, believable characters, and some of the best storytelling in the industry. Honestly, a Rockstar version of The Boys would probably have an insane world. The problem is, Rockstar loves making gigantic games and taking forever to release them. And I think this project works better when it's a focused experience instead of a 100-hour monster. Ubisoft also deserves a mention. As much as people love making fun of Ubisoft these days, I'm one of those people. I hate Ubisoft. They've ruined Assassin's Creed for me. When it comes to stealth mechanics, they've made some genuinely great systems over the years. The issue is tone. The Boys needs sharp writing, dark humor, and a constant sense of tension. And that's where I trust Insomniac more. So at the end of the day, I'd still give the project to Insomniac. Not because they're perfect for it, but because I think they're the studio most likely to balance the action, the story, and the superhero side of the experience without losing what makes The Boys special. And budget-wise, this would absolutely be a major AAA title. Multiple playable characters, motion capture, large environments, complex AI system. This game would not be cheap. Which is exactly why I think keeping the world semi-open instead of fully open is the smarter move. Now, a quick talk about the story part of the game. Look, it's not just gonna be having everything that happened in the show happen in this game too. That wouldn't work, okay? The end goal is obviously going to be killing Homelander, but it's not gonna just parallel every single season of the show. I think the best we can do is just go through season 1 to 3, parallel the story with them, and have a 6 to 7 chapter game that expands itself, and it's brave enough to make changes to what the show has done. But ultimately, it probably will have the same start and the same end goal as the show, but things can change. Or they may not. So, would a The Boys game actually work? Honestly, I think it could be incredible. Not because it's a superhero story, but because it isn't. The Boys is a story about surviving superheroes, and that's exactly what makes it different. The biggest mistake any developer could make would be turning this into a power fantasy. The Boys works because these people are terrifying. The game should make you feel that too. But that's just my version. What show or movie should I turn into a video game next? Let me know down below. If you enjoyed this first episode of the What If series, subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.